Hello, and welcome to the Wine Enthusiast podcast, your serving of drinks, culture, and the people who drive it. I'm Sarah Ventura, Senior Digital Editor here at Wine Enthusiast. On February 24th, 2022, Russian forces invaded Ukraine in what has become the largest armed conflict in Europe since World War II. More than 2 years later, the fighting continues. But for Ukrainians who have stayed in the country, everyday life goes on. Last year, investigative reporter Adam Robb spent a night out bar hopping in Lviv and documented his evening eating pizza and drinking gin and tonics to the sound of air raid warnings for wine enthusiasts. He recently returned from a major bar event in Kyiv, so we decided to check in on the current state of the country and its nightlife scene. Listen to find out about the lessons learned about trying to live a normal life against the backdrop of war. All right, Adam. So you wrote this really amazing piece for us about a night out drinking in Ukraine with air sirens voiced by Mark Hamill going off in the background, lots of people drinking and living their lives. Let's just start from the beginning. Why'd you go to Ukraine in the first place?
So the day of the Russian invasion, I remember I was in Paris working on the travel story and meeting with some documentary producers about a trafficking investigation I was working on at the time, and I was in the bathtub at Le Maurice, drinking a bottle of champagne, the bottle of Ruinart that they'd sent up, and I was watching the news of the invasion on the TV screen that was built in the bathroom mirror and from the bathtub, and that's my first association with alcohol in Ukraine, and that was February 22, so just over 2 years ago. At the end of 2022, I should say I spent most of 2021 and 2022, more than a year and a half investigating a big crypto fraud scheme, and by the end of 2022, that story had led me down another rabbit hole, and suddenly I found myself having dinner at Teresi in Soho with Ja Rule. Now, Ja Rule had a side business that declined to partake in this particular fraud scam that I was investigating, and he and his partners were so proud of this fact that Ja Rule could spot a scam other people could not, that he agreed to sit down with me and talk about it. Now, Ja Rule had two business partners. One was in the background, really just on paper, and the other was running his day-to-day operations, and that guy had been my point person. So right before dinner, I don't know why I hadn't done this earlier, but I looked up the third partner, the one on paper, and I'm looking at the Google results back when Google search worked, and I thought, wow, this guy has the worst SEO imaginable because every result for his name is about some guy who was arrested 20 years ago for kidnapping and torturing and branding someone. And it got me thinking, when was Ja Rule in prison, and when was this guy in prison, and were they in prison at the same time? And it all started to click in my head. So now I'm a little freaked out. I have just enough time to watch the episode of Law & Order SVU they made about Ja Rule's business partner. You could look it up and watch it on streaming. It's called Branded. And I'm watching the episode, but now I have to leave for dinner. And I'm stressed thinking about, how do I bring this up in conversation? When do I bring this up? Do I bring this up? And I get to Teresi, and Ja Rule's running 3 hours late. So I'm sitting with his publicist, drinking Negronis, eating bread. And finally, Ja sits down. And I'll say he's incredibly charming, charismatic in person. And the waiter rushes over. I remember Ja charmed the reading glasses right off the waiter's face and wore them the rest of the night reading the menu. And the waiter asked Ja Rule if he wanted an emergency martini, catch up with us. And instead, Ja Rule ordered a Moscow Mule, but he caught himself and said, wait, no, we can't say that anymore because of Russia. And he ordered a Kyiv Mule instead. And I just must have made some mental note then at that moment, wow, Ja Rule is so up on international affairs and boycotting Russia, and good for him. So in the back of my mind, that Ruinart moment, the Moscow Mule moment, I think subconsciously I've been primed to think about Ukraine and drinking in context together for a year before I committed to traveling there. And a few months after the Ja Rule dinner, I'm ready to publish this investigation with BuzzFeed News, and BuzzFeed News shuts down before the story is published. And right away I saw another story, another investigation in New York Magazine. And I remember I was on the roof of the Mayborn in Beverly Hills at Dante. I get the phone call from my editor, go ahead to this investigation. And I'm off to the Cannes Film Festival in a few weeks to investigate LA bar owner turned movie producer who had previously confessed to me that he was under investigation for terrorism. And it was years earlier, we were at this great little sushi restaurant, Silver Lake, that isn't there anymore. And he just got off the phone with his lawyer who had broken the news to him, and maybe he had a little too much sake. It felt confessional in that moment. And now all these years later, he's a movie producer, project to Cannes, this big story. And the week after I get back from France, the story becomes a little too heated, and that story gets killed. And first, I'll just say, because this is a Wine Enthusiast podcast, I do all my food and drink and travel writing and research while also reporting out these longer investigative, intensive, aggressive stories. So if you do find yourself in Cannes, you'd be remiss not to check out the Turkish coffee Negroni and the tobacco and date old fashioned at Roya, a Turkish restaurant on a terrace at the Carlton Hotel in Cannes, or take a long walk to Bichu Plage from the Van der Satchel guys at the end of the Pointe de Creuset, grab a Garibaldi there at sunset. But after two of those long investigations got killed back to back, I needed a break from writing about bad people. And I was looking to write something more positive. So last August, I'm wondering what to do next. And I read a story in the Washington Post by their Ukraine bureau chief. And it's all about how Ukrainians are boycotting Campari because it's sold in Russia. And I realized a few things reading this story. One, I guess I can't drink Garibaldis anymore. Two, I realized it's possible to write lifestyle coverage about the country in war. Their story, the Washington Post story, is written through a business lens, but they're also talking to local bar owners. And it made me think, long before Alex Garland's Civil War movie come out this past spring, like, what would lifestyle reporting journalism look like during a ground war? And in Civil War, in the movie, it's like a road trip movie following four journalists traveling from New York to DC. And one of the journalists writes for, quote unquote, like, what's left of the New York Times. And that was the headspace I was in reading this Washington Post story a year ago, thinking, like, if we are at war in America and we all still have media jobs, what would the New York Times style section, food section, travel section, Teen Magazine, what would wine enthusiasts be publishing every day, every month? And that's when it all kind of clicked for me to start covering the bar scene over there. And I hate to say this, but before I pitched Wine Enthusiasts, I pitched another nameless spirits publication. And the editor of that outlet had told me that this was a terrible idea, because if I wrote about the hospitality scene in Ukraine, they wouldn't be seen as suffering enough. And this is really upsetting to me, because I think if I'm living in a country at war and I'm trying to hustle and do my thing and live my best life, because we only have this one life and this one moment, we're only this age once, that I would want some foreign journalist to find me in America and capture me with all my dignity and spirit. And I would want there to be some document that said, I got through this time being active and creative, being a great bartender, a great chef, giving comfort to others, contributing something. Not that I was just some anonymous face waiting in line for a bowl of borscht from some international aid organization. And I had been guilty of that. I had written a story prior for Food and Wine magazine where I interviewed Jose Andras on the phone while he was driving out of Ukraine. And I had tried to go with him, and it didn't work out. So I didn't really have a sense of the ground. And so when I finally went on my own, I wasn't with any American chefs and wasn't shadowing anyone. I just kind of immersed myself in it. And I think my reporting was better off for it. And the third thing I realized reading the Washington Post story was, I realized war reporters go to terrible bars. I realize now, when I see a war movie and they're all at the hotel bar drinking, bragging, fucking, watching CNN, what we're doing, they really just don't know where else to get a good drink where they don't care. So I Googled the bars in the Washington Post article, and I just knew there had to be better options out there. And I think the first thing I did was check the world's 50 best bars discovery list. If there was like a legitimate great bar over there as a starting point, it would be on their list. And there were a few. So I followed those bars on Instagram and found the bartenders and seeing who they follow, where they go, what they post, and then moved on to restaurants and been piecing together an itinerary and requesting interviews. I should point out that's an insane thing to do. It felt very good, and I just wanted to contribute something positive to the world. I wanted to challenge myself. And again, it's an insane thing to say, but at that point, I've been really burnt out with investigations, and I felt like I'd rather die than have another story killed. And in terms of the kind of reporting I like to do, these stories aren't offending litigious people, and they would see the light of day, and that was really reassuring to me. So no matter what happened, my reporting would be frustrated by some outside force, and I felt better and safer doing it.
Well, I think those were two things that really struck me about the story when I was going through it. One was, the bar scene sounded incredible, and the cocktails and the creativity just sounded like what you would find in, any major city with a great culinary scene. But on top of it, the sort of sense of normalcy in the midst of this, major war, it kind of struck me in a way where it's like, it's hard to imagine what that would be like, as an American who hasn't lived through, a ground war like that. How do you carry on with your life while you're surrounded by fighting and, airstrikes and all of those sorts of things? And I think you did such a great job of sort of showing what that process was like.
It was just surprising to me being on the ground. I think I was also working on a story at the time for Kindness Traveler about Ukrainian refugees in Warsaw and them setting up businesses there. And I felt on my first trip to Ukraine that it was so easy to interview everyone, that they were very focused, very engaged, and I guess very stoic. And that surprised me. No one was overly emotional while I was speaking to them. And then when I got to Warsaw and I spoke to Ukrainians who had left the country behind and they knew they were safe now, they were the people who were emotional. They were the people who cried because they walked away and went towards safety and better life. And I think they had some residual guilt, but everyone on the ground in Ukraine was just every day living their best, fullest day-to-day life, even though like the PTSD, like the collective PTSD of whole towns, villages, cities was just, it was like electric in the air. Like you couldn't not feel it almost no matter where you went. And eventually you figure out that there are bars where people go to drink, to cope. And there are bars you can go to quietly or loudly celebrate or just live for today. And so it took a while to get a sense that those were two very distinct themes.
Yeah, I mean, you seem to, in the piece, highlight the bars where people would live, were living for today. I know you mentioned that it was mostly like women that were in the bars because a lot of the men were out fighting. What was the difference between, the vibes in those bars versus the vibes in the ones where people were going just to cope?
I remember my first day in Lviv going to a coffee shop and it being very busy. It was a beautiful sunny day last September, October, and there were lots of people, lots of beautiful, cool-looking people outside, with their laptops working or just relaxing in the sun. But there was like a very quiet energy about it, and I couldn't quite figure out where that was coming from. And the coffee shop owner explained to me that you just don't know if the person next to you just lost someone or they just found out they're basically being drafted. And everyone's mindful of that in an environment like that and wants to be respectful and quiet and no one gets too rowdy. And then a few 100 feet away, there was a bar called People Place that had a DJ in the window and had like groups of women, young women dressed up, going out for the night and like kicking off their night there with a non-Aperol spritz because they were boycotting Aperol. And it was crazy how that shift could just be a few 100 feet apart and you could walk from one mood to another.
Well, and I mean, what is it, again, hard to imagine, but what is it like going into a bar like that where it's like, what does it feel like where there's mostly, most bar scenes, there's a lot of people looking to go out and meet members of the whatever sex they're attracted to, so for it being mostly women, like what did that feel like?
It took a minute to realize that there were no men. That happened to me more than once. That I remember just a couple of weeks ago, leaving Ukraine on my last trip, that I was taking the train out back to Poland, and I'm looking around the train car, and it took me a minute to realize I was the only man on the train. And the men, since the second day of the war, they haven't been allowed to leave the country if they're able-bodied between a certain age. And it was just all women and children around me, and it's just like a shocking thing to witness that and realize that these people left behind. The male bar owners that I've met, they seemed more worried about business than about being drafted, which is good. But really, they were just living for that day and that moment. And I think the women going to really busy, popular bars like that were very much doing the same. There was a sense, I think, a year ago where it was more inappropriate, more looked down upon to party. And then on this past trip, I went to a brand new bar in Kyiv called Haram that was this like multi-story underground nightclub beneath like a big popular steakhouse in Kyiv. And they had opened in the past year during the war, and it had multiple, you go in downstairs and just the coat check is the size of like other bars I've been to. And then you go in this massive cavernous underground party space, and there's multiple like unique 10-seat bars. One was like a smoking bar where every drink is smoked, but you can also smoke cigarettes. And then you like travel downstairs in this other bar beneath like this huge sacrilegious stained glass window of the crucifixion, which is also depicting an orgy. And there's a gospel choir with a live band on the side performing like Bruno Mars songs and rap songs. And everyone's like just dancing. And and just letting off steam. And I think that was kind of missing in the first year. And now people feel either they're in for a long haul and they can engage with those feelings where it's okay to just like let go and let loose. But those are behind closed doors. I think in Kyiv, way more in Lviv, you saw more speakeasies, you saw more unmarked bars, where the best bars in town, the 50 best discovery bars like Loggerhead and Beatnik, those bars are almost like real speakeasies. You're not meant to distract from the more somber energy of the city, I guess.
And so, okay, so your first trip was to Lviv, right? And this last trip you went to Kyiv, or did you travel to both cities?
I went to more places this time. So yeah, I got a better sense of the country on the most recent trip. But I started in Lviv, took the train to Kyiv for what was the first bar show in Ukraine in 3 years. It was a partnership with Diageo Bar Academy. They put on a show called, I'm going to say it wrong. It's the Ukrainian word for unity. And I want to say Spolnota, that's right. And they invited all the best bartenders from around the country. I think they came from everywhere but Kharkiv, but they came from Odessa and Vinnytsia and Lviv and Kyiv and Dnipro. And it was the first time all these bartenders could see each other in 3 years. I remember speaking to a bartender from Odessa who has a bar, Fakultat, which is like one of the best bars down there. And he said his friends don't come to the bar he owns. He tells them not to come because Odessa is so affected by drone attacks and drones are really cheap. And somewhere like Kyiv is only susceptible to missile attacks and they have a strong missile defense system, but you wouldn't waste the money to use a missile against a drone. And so the drone attacks are very common in Odessa, and it's a more dangerous place. And so he lost his staff. They left to go to bars in the EU or elsewhere, but he was the owner, and he just kind of like been, alone every day, keeping the bar open and powering through, like representing Ukrainian Odessa and trying to find people with that same spirit, like to work alongside him. But he was so excited to then come up to Kyiv and see guys from so many other bar programs, women from so many other bar programs, to get a sense of just what we've all been working on the past 3 years and to try each other's drinks and new menus and new concepts. And so even though bar shows are so common, and there's like the Rome bar show was like a week later, and there's a Zurich bar show next week, and then Bar Coven Brooklyn, and then Tales of Cocktail, but like it's a common thing that's easy enough for international bartenders or local bartenders to find in their community. But this was a big deal to have a bar show in Kyiv, and it just brought out the best of everyone. And so that was exciting to see. And the surrealness of that was that the night before, everyone had arrived, everyone was staying in the same hotel on that Friday night, and there was news that week that Russia was going to attack, like blow up two Kyiv hospitals, because they said they were actually like secret military bases. And this was kind of like, I think it was in the news, it was like the rumor going around, and everyone was nervous there was going to be an attack on Kyiv that weekend. And so I remember taking the train from Lviv to Kyiv. It was like a 6-hour train ride, and getting there at 10:30 p.m. and everything closes at like 11 and curfew is midnight. And like everyone's like making a rush toward McDonald's while the alarm's going off, but it's like 10:35 and McDonald's turning people away. And then like had to find my car to throw out cars and get to my Holiday Inn, and all before midnight. And then just getting there and hearing the air sirens, and when the air sirens wind down, you just hear dogs howling in the street, and you just hear that from like 11 p.m. So I think it was like 4 a.m. that night. And by 5 a.m. I went back to sleep, and by 10, 11 a.m. I guess I woke up, and like everyone else, I made my way to the bar show. And I realized, I've come to realize being there, and it's a bit other thing, is you learn what's important, and you put the small things about last night behind you, and you live in the moment. And so everyone went to that bar show. It was a sunny day. Nothing else happened that weekend, and we all lived in the moment, and that was a very inspiring thing to witness. So yeah, so when I rode the train from Lviv to Kyiv, I rode the train with other bartenders who were who have bars and who work at hotel bars in Lviv, and they were very excited for the bar show, just to have something else to go to, somewhere to see people. And the F&B director at the hotel I was staying at in Lviv, the Grand Hotel, it's like the best hotel in town. She was, very proud of the hotel's bar program, and they had just opened like a Hennessy Paradise lounge and their cigar lounge, and I don't think people realize they're like people are coming to spend money, and they're updating things, and they're proud of the environments they create for other people. And she had been through a lot. She was saying her brother-in-law is fighting in the East now, that she lost her husband. I'm sorry, she lost her brother fighting in the East last year. And she still wakes up every day and is really proud of the bars and the restaurants she runs in the hotel. And we're excited to see what these guys are talking about in the program. And people don't just like live with their head in the sand, or they don't live in a bomb shelter. Like you want to go out and experience life, and experience your interest, your passion, your career, and advance yourself, advance your, what makes you happy every day, and feel fulfilled. So no matter where I went in Ukraine, it was good to see people behaving that way. And I just think that's something that gets a little underreported.
Yeah, I mean, it seems, I can only imagine what it's like living under those circumstances and how that must impact your nervous system. Like, I'm sure hearing air raid sirens, or as you mentioned, Mark Hamill from Star Wars' voice going off, announcing an air raid, has to affect you on a level that, is beyond just anxiety, but like impacting your body and like, your overall nervous system.
I'm glad to say that Mark Hamill's voice does not give me PTSD right now, but it was a crazy thing when I was like in LA a year ago. I was with this music manager who's friendly with him, and he and his wife were talking about having Mark Hamill over for dinner that Friday night. And I was like, oh, what a nice thing it is to have Luke Skywalker over your house. And the closest I've ever come to that is hearing Mark Hamill telling me to seek shelter during an air raid in Lviv. And it's a weird thing that he did that he recorded. A different voice does it in Ukrainian, but the English version of the Air Alert app is Mark's voice telling you overconfidence is your weakness, which is something he says to the Emperor in, I think, Return of the Jedi, and to seek shelter. And then you hear this like piercing air siren emanate from your phone. And then when you get the all clear, he wishes you may the force be with you, and tells you it's all okay. It's comforting and eerie at the same time. I guess it's nice to hear a familiar voice overseas, but also being aware you're listening to a recording that exists long after, society has vanished off the face of the earth, but still Mark Hamill's voice lives on in an app warning people to seek shelter. It's a little dystopian, but it depends who you're with, and it depends on your own seek your own adventure attitude. But there are people who turn the alarm off, and I've got to the point where I trust people more now in Telegram groups, Telegram chats, to tell me what's going on than I do just a more general app, which is just a picture of a missile saying like, seek shelter. And you adapt. And a lot of people that Friday night, because the missiles never came from Russia and just the alarm sounded all night, they went to sleep, or they tried to sleep, but did not go to the bomb shelter. And the first time the air raid siren went off, the first time I heard Mark Hamill's voice, I was at a bar called Saibo, which is this amazing like 2-story coffee shop cocktail bar that reminded me of Drink in Boston, and had like low countertops and like a very engaging bartender across the way to make you whatever you wanted. And I was with the bar manager, the bar owner there, and like great guys. And I don't think I had even downloaded the app yet. And they were telling me, because they were looking at their phone, that the alarm was sounded. So I downloaded the app right away. And I was like, should we go? And they were like, no. Like, our friends tell us through Telegram that it's actually just like Russian planes are flying overhead doing exercise or something. And it's not anything we need to immediately prepare for. And so I stayed out. I knew someone who was staying in a hotel in town, and she messaged me, and she had gone down to the bomb shelter in a hotel, which also like doubled as the hotel spa, and like in the basement. And she was like sitting there on a bench, and people were like in their towels going to and from the spa. She felt embarrassed. And I decided like, you shouldn't be down there. Like, it's okay. Like, got her out of the bomb shelter and took her drinking. So I was glad that she cooperated with that and trusted me. And we had a great night, and we were able to have like 5 more hours of our life back to go out and enjoy the city and not worry. And then the alarm sounded. It was all clear, and we were good to enjoy the rest of the evening. But I kind of feel that the only story you find in a bomb shelter is if something happens to you there. So that's just not where I'd want to be.
Always find what you love at Total Wine & More. With so many great bottles to choose from at the lowest price, it's easy to find your favorite Cabernet or a new single-barrel bourbon to try with some help from one of their friendly guides. And with every bottle comes the confidence of knowing you just found something amazing. With the lowest prices for over 30 years, find what you love and love what you find. Only at Total Wine & More. Curbside pickup and delivery available in most areas. Visit TotalWine.com to learn more. Spirits not sold in Virginia and North Carolina. Drink responsibly. B21.
You detailed the night in the story a bit where you went to the first bar. You said Siavo, right? Is that how you pronounce it?
I hope so.
Okay. And I think you were drinking gin and tonics, I believe.
Yeah, they had a great gin bar, and it was the same weekend or same days as like a big tech conference. And so the bar was like packed with people coming to the tech conference. It was rush hour, happy hour. It was a full scene. So it was great just to witness like a normal weekday and see a thriving city and a thriving bar, and it'd feel like home. And the more you enter environments like that bar at that time, like the more it feels relatable to you in America or anywhere. And it feels like, okay, this is a normal life. They're living a normal life. And so it just makes you feel safer and more at ease every day, which is like a good feeling. And it's a collective feeling. If everyone goes to the bar, if everyone goes out after work, then it just makes the people around them feel more secure. And I remember talking to coffee shop owners, Spit Coffee, this roastery in town. It's like one of the oldest Ukrainian coffee roasteries. And they were saying how very early on in the war, when the siren sounded, the sense was that everyone should like close the doors and pack up and go into shelter, either like beneath the coffee shop or find one nearby. Pretty much every building had a basement, at least in Lviv. And they got the sense over time that their customers would rather come out, and they felt psychologically safer, healthier, better for all being together in the coffee shop or all being together in the bar instead of being alone in your basement. And so it was a unique example of resilience to experience. And you don't really think that just having a gin and tonic at a bar during like the evening rush is an act of resilience or an act of rebellion, but it's a small thing that makes people feel good and feel strong. And that was inspiring to witness.
And, I know you went to a bunch of other places as well. And I'd say, again, the cocktails and the mixology sounded very impressive. Like, what were you, what drinks and dishes were you most impressed by?
Yeah, I went to, so the bar where I was when we got the all clear that first night, second night I was in Ukraine was Sino Experimental. And Andre, the original owner and bartender there, a lot of bar owners talked about how before the war, they all had to kind of like operate through COVID, which had its own challenges, and then operate in the war. But so during COVID, he did a lot of like batch drinks, which led to him like canning or bottling cocktails. And then during the war, he got really into foraging. And I thought that was fascinating because I think there's probably something just disassociated a little bit. Everyone like probably puts out of their minds when they're over there. And I think one of the things I put out of my mind was, wow, we're really close to Chernobyl. And having watched the HBO series, you just don't think people are foraging in Ukraine and like in the forest, in the West, in like Transcarpathia or in the east around Chernobyl, and then putting those things in food or drink. And it's not good. And but he was talking about how he made a really popular cherry soda whiskey drink, and the cherries came from a foraging trip up a mountain. He met someone who was kind of had on his property these wild cherry trees growing, and offered him all the cherries he wanted to use them to make the drink. And it's my assumption that I'm sure foraging is safe and fine enough in the West. And so his drinks, which were based on lots of local ingredients, like including mushrooms and other things he found, like that made the bar popular, and it allowed him to really stand out at that time. But then like just last week or 2 weeks ago, I was with this guy, Yevhen Klobutenko, who's the most famous chef, I guess, in Ukraine. He has a new cookbook out about capturing the flavors of all the regions in Ukraine. And he was telling me that before the war, he actually foraged around Chernobyl and served the things he found there in the restaurant as like little touches and garnishes and dishes, which absolutely blew my mind. And he was saddened because of the war. All the kind of forest area around Chernobyl is now laid with landmines, so you can't forage there anymore. But I was surprised to see how it doesn't bother Ukrainians to engage their produce and engage foraging. And the last thing I thought about was like where my food was coming from, where my drinks were coming from while I was there. But yeah, Andre Encino, he changed the menu every week, and he just used what was seasonal, what he could find around to really challenge people's perception of what classic cocktails were. And so that was that was a nice surprise. And then he led me to another bar called Bar Over, which was a spin-off of a bar called the Ditch Bar in Kharkiv. And Kharkiv is all the way in eastern Ukraine, kind of like where near the front lines, and it's attacked. I think it was just horribly attacked the last couple of days. And Ditch Bar is one of the last bars standing in Kharkiv, and also one of the best. Like, one very cool bar. They take care of their own. People can come there and get whatever resources they need, but also they make awesome cocktails. They do, I think, bottle cocktails or canned cocktails to go. And one of the owners from Ditch Bar decided to move west, and he opened in Lviv. And you saw a lot of bar owners from the east more and more opening in the west, where it's safer. There's less of a reason to attack the west of the Ukraine. And so they were opening in Lviv. And so he opened Bar Over there. And it's this beautiful, intimate upstairs bar and dining room. And just, again, like classic cocktail. I mean, he made like an excellent Negroni with a non-Campari product. And everyone creates not only great drinks, but really intimate environments. Everyone really focuses on making a standout space that is unique into itself and would be both for its menu and its decor and ambiance energy, like would make it a bar you would see on a 50 best discovery list or 50 best list if it was if there were judges getting in the country, which there aren't right now.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of which, how did you even get into the country? How did that process work?
Yeah, I flew from New York to Krakow, and Krakow is the nearest big airport to the Ukrainian border. And so there's a great car service called A-Transfer, highly recommend. And it's all Mercedes Sprinter vans or Mercedes, but they'll take you the 6 hours it takes to drive from Krakow airport to Lviv for less than the price of an Uber from Midtown to Atlantic City. And so as far as bad ideas go, that was a horrible one. And so they're great drivers. You feel they know how to navigate Polish customs and Ukrainian border control. And the first three and a half hours to drive from Krakow to the border, it's just, open highways. And you see, the one thing you notice probably at this point is U.S. military equipment or other NATO military equipment moving into Ukraine. So you see police cars like escorting tanks and things on flatbeds going into the country. And then you get to the border control, and it's there's multiple lines. So you see, because there's no planes going to Ukraine or ships, everything comes in now by truck from the west. So you see miles and miles of lines of trucks that are like everything from World Central Kitchen to gas and fuel, like oil and fuel, whatever. And so you see those backed up for, I have no idea how long they process. I can't imagine how long those drivers like sleep in their trucks, like waiting to just like move up, like I guess one batch at a time through customs. The car line's a little bit shorter. And so when you enter Ukraine, when you leave the EU, when you leave Poland, you're just kind of ushered through. They don't really like search your luggage or anything and aren't really concerned why you're there. And then in Ukraine, it's pretty easy. The only issues are like when you leave Ukraine, you re-enter the EU. I will say they search everything and it takes forever. And I do not recommend the car to leave Ukraine because those lines are tragic. It's much faster on a train or on a bus. But my experience was that when you leave Ukraine, they open, like when I was on a train with all the Ukrainian women, they opened every woman's suitcase and they went through like every possession, and they're just like really looking to see what gets smuggled out of Ukraine into the EU. And on a human level, you can understand that, people want to take valuables with them, whatever is important to them, and get it. But then I understand you also like worry about, I guess, other kinds of smuggling, but they are very strict and they search everything, and that slows down the line. So if it's 6 hours going in, it could be like 24 hours going out. And in terms of like the lines you wait in. So it's much faster it moves quicker on the train or a bus, but the car was the best way in. So I took the car in the first day and got to Lviv in the morning, and I was slowed down by about an hour. I already had like a full schedule of appointments of people to meet, and I already missed my first one. Was already feeling it over my head because about an hour outside of Lviv, traffic just came to a halt, and there was a funeral procession like going down the other lane of traffic in like whatever small town we were driving through. And our driver got out and I got out, and you saw like a military band, a whole congregation from a church, and like young girls like walking behind a hearse with flowers, and just the whole town, everything stops. And this happens every day because people die every day and are mourned every day. And that is one thing that you can't ignore. And I think that was the one thing I couldn't ignore the first time I went. And then the most recent time I went, I think the one thing I couldn't ignore was just how many wounded vets I saw everywhere, which I did not see a year ago, and how prevalent that was, especially in Kyiv. But going in, we paused for the funeral and then made our way into the city. And I'd already missed my first appointment with a bakery that I just wrote about like last week for New York Magazine that had like a viral pastry. And I felt badly because these people, again, they have a thriving business and they're trying to live their best lives. And, you know, I'm late to the game in terms of reporters coming to Ukraine. And so I'm sure they've dealt with foreign press before and, you know, didn't need me holding up their whole day. So it took me a while to get like acclimated and to apologize to them and get a second interview. And that was an adjustment. And I went to the Lviv Tourism Board office to check in with them. I think they've kind of pivoted to being a press liaison office. And they were kind enough to just help smooth over some introductions and set me on the right foot for the rest of the day to go smoothly. And that felt good. And then, you know, within hours, I think, after that, I really felt at home with everyone I was speaking to. And, you know, you go to the hotel, you check in the hotel, like you would anywhere else. I think the only thing is that American Express does not work anywhere in Ukraine. And other than that, I felt pretty like at ease. And yeah, you check in and it's like any other hotel with all the amenities. And then use that as my jumping off point to just explore the town. And then the only thing that was, I guess, a little eerie was the end of the first night coming back there and just like realizing like the streets out the window are empty and we're all just indoors now until sunrise the next day.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's like my last question. Like having gone twice now and having experienced what it's, you know, or getting a little taste of what it's like to live life or at least see life being lived in the midst of war. What was it like? What's your takeaway from those experiences? Like, what did it leave you with?
It left me feeling, I wish when this is all over and people go back and like look at the reporting done. I know all the reporting that everyone's doing over there in the moment is very important when you're talking about troop movements and aid and money. But I just think the human aspect is a little bit overlooked. And I would love to know after all this, I'd love to see like more reporting like that and just more of these people's stories told, because for the average citizen in all these cities and towns and villages everywhere, they're just moments that would be otherwise recognized or celebrated just aren't being seen by the outside world, or even maybe, you know, in the larger world and country. And that just makes me feel terrible. I just think about how in the US there's been such a shift from the outlets closing and a shift from hard news reporting to lifestyle reporting and influencers and TikTok and personal essays. And I think it's ingrained, I think, in Americans under any conditions, because I think COVID, the pandemic is an example of this. Like we'll always kind of like celebrate or recognize what we're doing amongst ourselves. And I don't see enough of that. I think maybe it's not ingrained in people over there anyway to just to live that way, and maybe it's too narcissistic, but people should get recognized for the good work they do. And I just wish there were more reporters there exploring that. So I find that fulfilling, and it motivates me to keep going back. So I'm going back in a couple of weeks. I'm going back in August to make a documentary. And I just want people there to feel less, I want them to feel more seen. And I just want American readers to have more empathy and see themselves in these people, and not think that victims of any war, any violence, any tragedy anywhere are like some other kind of people that aren't like themselves. Because going over there, you very much feel these people are just like you. And I just want that to be better recognized.
Yeah, I think that you did a really great job of sort of highlighting the everyday life and like everyday successes and accomplishments of people, but also just the resilience and sort of will to keep going in the face of catastrophic circumstances. I'd imagine that it would probably like leave a mark and sort of change you to some extent after having experienced that, where most of us have not come even close.
I think it shapes everyone I think it shapes it for the better. I think that the people I've spoken with would talk about how being there, living their lives last 2.5 years, the best of them experience a level of empathy that no human being is normally pushed to experience. And the way they just see themselves in one another and are eager to help one another and engage one another, it brings out a real selflessness in everyone that is, people don't expect to be driven to that level of virtue. And it's a great thing they are, and they recognize it's a great thing that they have become virtuous in that way, but it shouldn't take such a tragedy to make people that virtuous.
So would you say the takeaway is we all need to cultivate more empathy for one another?
Cultivate more empathy and see yourself in other people, and that diplomacy is always the best solution.
Well, on that note, I really appreciate your time with us and your work on the story. It was a pleasure to read, and we're very happy to have it on our site. And thank you.
Thank you so much.
It's hard to imagine how one would go on living life in such extraordinary circumstances. But we're grateful to get a peek into the ways Ukraine's hospitality professionals have attempted to cultivate a sense of normalcy and escape for their community. How would you cope? We want to know. You can email us your comments and questions at podcast@wineenthusiast.net. Remember, you can subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Google, Spotify, and anywhere else you listen to your favorite shows. You can also go to wineenthusiast.com/podcast for more episodes and transcripts. I'm Sarah Ventura. Thanks for listening.